Hey there, Twisters, and welcome to my Metropolitan Division preview for the 2022-23 NHL season. So the way that I'm going to structure this, first of all, we'll start with a recap of the division this past season. Then I'll talk about the biggest additions and subtractions within the division in the offseason through trades and free agency. Then we'll go through each team, examining their biggest strengths and weaknesses and biggest question marks for this upcoming season. And then I'll finish things off with my overall outlook on the division for this upcoming season. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. Feel free to predict the division 1 through 8. I'm actually going to save mine for a separate video, so be on the lookout for that. And if you enjoy content like this, we've got more division previews, season predictions, all that good stuff coming at you for this upcoming season, in addition to some content from the Global Series in Prague in October, so stick around, guys. So let's start things off by recapping the division last year. We had the Carolina Hurricanes finishing in first with 116 points, very close to that President's Trophy. They were eliminated in the second round in 7 games by the team that finished just under them in the division, and that is the New York Rangers. Certainly ahead of schedule in terms of coming out of that rebuild. Just a great breakthrough year for the Rangers with 110 points, getting to the conference final, and actually having a 2-0 series lead against Tampa. Then in third, we had the Pittsburgh Penguins. They're pretty much a lock to finish in the top 3 every year. 103 points. They dealt with a ton of injuries, and they nearly knocked off the Rangers in the first round. The Sidney Crosby injury was definitely a factor later on in the series. The Washington Capitals once again returned to the playoffs with 100 points. They were eliminated in the first round by the Florida Panthers in 6 games. And then the 4 teams that did not qualify for the playoffs, we had the New York Islanders, 37, 35, and 10, so about NHL 500. Then the Columbus Blue Jackets, a little bit behind them, 37, 38, and 7. The New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia Flyers brought up the rear in this division, and they were eliminated from playoff contention rather quickly. Now let's look at the biggest additions to the Metropolitan Division from this offseason and the biggest subtractions from the division in the offseason. So let's look at the left column. These are players who have come into the division in the offseason via trades or free agency. So first of all, Brent Burns, coming from the San Jose Sharks to the Carolina Hurricanes in a trade. He will certainly be an X factor for producing from the blue line there. Johnny Gaudreau was probably the biggest addition through free agency, coming from the Calgary Flames and joining the Columbus Blue Jackets, whereas he could have joined a couple other teams in this division. The New Jersey Devils gained a couple of veteran forwards in the likes of Andre Palat from the Lightning, in addition to Eric Haula from the Boston Bruins. Alexander Romanov joins the New York Islanders defense corps in a trade with the Montreal Canadiens. Jeff Petrie comes in a trade from the Canadiens to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then the Washington Capitals have a couple big additions on their own. So first of all, Darcy Kemper, goaltender and Stanley Cup champion from the Colorado Avalanche, and Dylan Strome. He's going to have to be a key factor if the Capitals want to play or want to return to the playoffs this upcoming season. So he joins from the Blackhawks. And here are the notable subtractions. So first of all, Nino Niederreiter signs with the Nashville Predators after playing in Carolina. Oliver Bjorkstrand is traded over to the Seattle Kraken from the Blue Jackets. The Ducks gain a couple of former Rangers in the likes of Frank Vatrano and also Ryan Strome. Andrew Kopp, who was also part of the trade deadline acquisitions for the Rangers, he leaves for the Detroit Red Wings. Evan Rodriguez recently signed with the Colorado Avalanche after a couple of great seasons with the Penguins. Ilya Samsonov leaves from the Washington Capitals to play with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then lastly, Oscar Lindblom leaves the Philadelphia Flyers to join the San Jose Sharks. Now, this doesn't encapsulate every single move from the offseason. These are just the most notable ones from what I saw. Now let's examine the strengths, weaknesses, and biggest question marks of every team in the Metropolitan Division heading into this season. So we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So we're going to start with the Philadelphia Flyers, a 20-46 record in regulation. That's what you see toward the top left there. In terms of goals for average, they were 31st in the NHL, so they struggled mightily there. 27th in goals against. They had the worst power play in the NHL, and they were 25th in penalty kill. Now, one of their biggest additions in the offseason was Tony DeAngelo coming over from the Carolina Hurricanes, and that is something that could potentially help their power play this upcoming season, especially if you're looking on the right side of the screen here, Ryan Ellis will be missing some time to start this upcoming season, so you do need a good puck mover. They should have some support there from the right side of the point. Also, Sean Couturier, after only playing in 29 games this past season, he's healthy. Kevin Hayes should be healthy as well for a forward core that's not all that particularly deep. You look in the bottom six there aren't that many names that jump out at you when you have the likes of Morgan Frost, Patrick Brown, Zach McEwen. So having Hayes healthy should help. And when you look at the other side of things, Joel Farabee should be missing some time to start this season as well. Also look at Cam York. He played in 30 games this past season. He's a former first-round draft pick, and this defenseman put up 10 points in 30 games. He's a possible breakout candidate. In addition to, I had Owen Tippett in the center of this sheet here. So Tippett is someone who is also a first-round draft pick. Didn't exactly flourish with the Florida Panthers, but maybe for a team that could be struggling this upcoming season, he could flourish a little bit in kind of a third or maybe even second-line role as the season progresses. Of course, when you're going to talk about the Flyers, you also have to talk about John Tortorella now joining as the head coach of this team. So he actually had a year off after coaching the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he had done a really good job with that personnel, helping them win their first playoff series and be a very good team defensively and in net. So we'll see if he's able to at least help them in that respect. He's had a lot of success in terms of where he's gone in his NHL career. But of course, with Tortorella, he does kind of clash with some of the personalities on the teams that he's coached. So how will he do with Tony DeAngelo? How will he do with Cam Atkinson, who he coached in Columbus? And what is kind of his shelf life with the Philadelphia Flyers? And on top of that, this team was 1 Game 7 away from making the conference final back in 2020, Carter Hart being a huge part of that. But the thing is that ever since then, they've completely free-fallen. And so will they have an opportunity to move on from some of these bad contracts later in the season by dealing some players and gaining some assets to hopefully rebuild this team? Yeah, they've got Cutter Gauthier in their prospect system. But that being said, it's going to be hard to move on from a couple of these deals, at least from what I see on Cap Friendly. All right, our next team here is the New Jersey Devils, and they actually finished with a slightly worse regulation record than the Flyers. They were 19th in goals for average, they were 29th in goals against average, 28th ranked power play, and the 14th ranked penalty kill. The young forwards are definitely on the rise for the Devils. Jesper Bratt, he averaged a point per game this past season. Nico Hischier had 60 points. Jack Hughes, as you can see down here, he had 56 points in 49 games. So if he can stay healthy, then he could possibly be like a 90-point player. You also have Dawson Mercer, don't forget about him. They also strengthened the forward group by adding Andre Palat to play in the top 6, and also Eric Haula. In particular with Palat, he was a monster performer for the Lightning in their Stanley Cup final run, and Eric Haula is somebody who should be able to help with their faceoffs quite a bit. They also acquired Vitek Vanacek in the offseason, and he played really well in the regular season for the Capitals as he kind of took over the net for a good stretch of the season. Maybe that will help ease the burden on Mackenzie Blackwood, who over the past couple of seasons has really not looked himself. You look at the numbers here, just an .892 save percentage, a 3.39 goals against average. Can he get back to that Mackenzie Blackwood that we saw from about 3 years ago? Maybe having a competent 1B or backup option in net will help him and actually kind of give him some competition to elevate his game again. I also take a look at a couple other players like Dougie Hamilton. 30 points in 62 games is nothing to scoff at per se, but this guy is capable of a little bit more from the backside. He was 4th for the Norris Trophy just 2 seasons ago. And finally, 2 more points. Lindy Ruff has been there for a few years, and the results just aren't there yet for the Devils. So I do kind of question his shelf life, especially because they've hired Andrew Brunette to join as an assistant coach. He had some success there with the Florida Panthers in relieving Joel Quenneville last season. And also this team, they need to find a way to hold leads. They had the most losses in the NHL after they scored the first goal. Now we get to the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team that was pretty competitive for a large portion of this season and eventually tailed off, but they were just 26 and 38 in regulation. They were 14th in goals for average, just 28th in goals against average, 24th on the power play, and 20th on the penalty kill. So, of course, the big story here with the Blue Jackets, the arrival of Johnny Gaudreau. He finished 4th for the Hart Trophy this past season, 115 points, and you imagine him pairing with Patrick Laine and also Boone Jenner, a guy who has scored 30 goals in his career before. So you have a good veteran top line for Columbus, but you also have some great promising young forwards in the likes of Cole Sillinger, in the likes of Kent Johnson, and you also have Yegor Chinnikov in addition to others. So can these guys take a step forward? How much of a workload will they have this upcoming season? That is something to look out for, especially when you look at somebody like Gustav Nyquist or also Jakub Voracek. Nyquist had over 50 points this past season Voracek had over 60, but these guys are getting a little bit older in their career. I think they're both 33 or 34. So can they keep things up at this level while some of that young talent continues to take a step forward? When you look at the backside for the Columbus Blue Jackets, they were not particularly strong this past season, even though you have Zach Werenski, a guy who has finished as high as 8th for the Norris Trophy voting and is not even in the prime of his career just yet at 25 years old. Somebody like Adam Boqvist, a former first rounder, definitely needs to take a step forward and be somewhat responsible defensively. Now, they added Eric Goodbranson, who played for the Calgary Flames, who had a really good defense this past season, and they also added Jake Bean, so we'll see if those additions are good augmentations for the blue line. They still need to be a little bit better in net, though. Elvis Merzlikins, he played 60 games this past season. He finished as high as 5th for the Vezina Trophy just a couple of seasons ago, but hopefully he can continue to kind of get back to that level. But I think one thing that would definitely help him would be Jonas Korpisalo having a bit of a bounce back season. It's been a rough couple of years for Korpisalo. His goals against average was over 4 this past season, so maybe they need to find a way to make some sort of a change with their goaltending depth. Now we get to the New York Islanders. They started this past season with a 14-game road trip, and they just weren't able to build much momentum after that. Still, they finished with a regulation record of 34 and 35. They were 23rd in goals for average. They were tied for 7th in goals against average, 12th ranked power play, and the penalty kill was very impressive at 4th in the NHL. Outstanding goaltending for the Islanders with the likes of Ilya Sorokin. He was, I think, 6th for the Vezina Trophy this past season. You also have Semyon Varlamov, a really good defense core that now has some good offense from the likes of Noah Dobson. 13 goals and 38 assists for the young defenseman this past year. A couple of question marks for the Islanders. First of all, will Lane Lambert help right the ship after this team fired Barry Trotz? Lambert is a longtime assistant of Trotz, but hopefully with this personnel, it's a very similar roster to what they've had in the past, and they're coming off of 2 conference final appearances in the 2 seasons prior to last year. So will Lambert find a way to kind of recapture that magic from just a couple of seasons ago? Matthew Barzal has to be a big piece in this equation. Only 59 points in 73 games this past season, and this guy is capable of being a point-per-game player. He's up for a contract in 2023, so I imagine that he will definitely have kind of a return to form there. Oliver Wahlstrom is somebody who needs to help out in terms of generating some even strength offense for this team. As you can see here, 12th on the power play, but just 23rd overall in offense. They are lacking some top-end firepower, and somebody like Wahlstrom breaking out would definitely help. They only had 2 20-goal scorers this past season. Yeah, Brock Nelson had 37 of his own, but they need a little bit more from the forward group as a whole. The next team here is the Washington Capitals. Their regulation record was 35 and 26. They were 10th in goals for. They were 13th in goals against. Just 23rd on the power play, but 12th on the penalty kill. Now, first and foremost, Alex Ovechkin is still a boss for this team. The captain had 50 goals and 40 assists this past season. However, there are definitely a couple of significant injuries to the Capitals. So, on one side of things, Nicholas Backstrom, longtime center, great playmaker, he's going to be out indefinitely, and Tom Wilson will be out in the long term as well. However, on the other side of things, they should have a healthy Anthony Mantha and TJ Oshie, and Oshie is definitely crucial to their power play success. He plays that bumper role and has been fantastic in that role for a number of years, so that's one reason why the power play was just ranked 23rd this past season. Maybe even Connor McMichael, a former first-round draft pick, will get some opportunity with Backstrom and Wilson out, so keep your eye on that guy. He had 18 points in 68 games, averaging just 10.5 minutes of time on ice per game. One other key factor here is Dylan Strome. He was signed from Chicago, so can he be a good fill-in for Nicholas Backstrom? He had a pretty strong season offensively this past year. Now on the backside of things, Darcy Kemper was brought in the offseason, the Stanley Cup champion, had a really good regular season with Colorado, although he wasn't that great in the playoffs from what I saw. However, he could still be an upgrade over either Ilya Samsonov or Vitek Vanacek. And even though the Capitals have enough star power, especially if they're able to get healthy, they do have some players who are getting older in their careers with the likes of Backstrom, Oshie, Ovechkin, Lars Eller, just to name a few. John Carlson is 32 or 33 years old. So maybe for some of them, you might actually see a slight drop in production. And the thing is that the division is getting tougher with the likes of New Jersey adding some veterans in addition to their young forwards, as we looked at earlier. Columbus should be good in a couple of years. You even consider some of the teams in the Atlantic Division who got better in the offseason, like Detroit, Ottawa, and even Buffalo. And so with the Capitals, it's going to be a little bit harder to get into the playoffs this upcoming season. And if they're not able to qualify, or if they get eliminated in the first round for a fifth straight time, some big changes could be ahead here. You look at Peter Laviolette and the fact that they haven't gotten over the hump with him, or even Todd Reirden before that, and some of the veterans I just mentioned earlier. And things could look a little bit different for the Capitals in the near future. Now we get to the Pittsburgh Penguins, another very strong season for them in the regular season. 37-25 was their record in regulation, 11th in goals for average, 5th in goals against average. That's actually a little surprising to me. 19th on the power play, and the 3rd best penalty kill in the NHL. First of all, with Pittsburgh, again, another year where they're decimated by injuries, but Mike Sullivan has done a tremendous job. I think he should always be in that consideration for the Jack Adams Award. They have an overall deep forward group, a little thin at the second line in terms of players who have kind of fallen off a little bit. I'll talk about that momentarily. And lastly, they play strong team defense. Certainly goaltending is part of that equation, but also you have some good defenders out there, the likes of Marcus Pettersson and Brian Dumoulin, in addition to somebody who can move the puck like Chris Letang. In terms of negatives, there are only 2 things that really stick out with me. First of all, Tristan Jarry had an amazing regular season, as you can see down below here, but he hasn't been quite the same in the playoffs just yet. I would say this past postseason was better than the one before, but even so, he needs to clamp things down better when things matter most, but he's only 27 years old, so this guy is just getting into the prime of his career. And when I mentioned the second line here, yeah, Evgeny Malkin can still definitely get things done, but he's had injury problems. He had that big contract just recently, and so you hope that he doesn't tail off after earning a good paycheck. You have Jason Zucker, somebody who hasn't been quite the same over the past several seasons. Injuries have definitely plagued him in that regard. Even Rickard Rakell was somebody who was supposed to be a superstar with the Anaheim Ducks, but he hasn't been quite the same. He's now just kind of a point every other game kind of player. So those are a couple of guys in the middle 6 who I expect to hopefully elevate their game this upcoming season. And 2 other questions I have here. How good can this team be if they're healthy? Can they actually challenge for the division? Or kind of on the other side of things, even if they are healthy, do we see any sort of regression from some of the veterans out there like Crosby, Letang, Malkin, or Jeff Carter? Because this past season, all of them were actually really, really good. Now we get to the New York Rangers, who finished 44-24 in regulation this past season. This team is definitely ahead of schedule and had a breakthrough season for sure. They are tied for 16th in goals for average, 2nd best goals against average in the NHL, 4th best power play, and 7th best penalty kill. The biggest strength for the Rangers is without question Igor Shesterkin, .935 save percentage and a 2.07 goals against average, as he finished 3rd for the Hart Trophy and won the Vezina. They also have an excellent defense core, especially in the top 4, with the likes of Adam Fox, who was 5th for the Norris Trophy this past year after winning it the previous season. You also have Ryan Lindgren and Keandre Miller, who are fantastic at keeping the puck out of the net, in addition to the intimidation factor that is Jacob Trouba. And lastly, as I mentioned just a moment ago, really good special teams, 4th on the power play and 7th on the penalty kill. That is something that can definitely help you as you get into the playoffs, as special teams can be a big momentum shifter. Now, while they added Vincent Trocheck in the offseason, they lost quite a few players in the forward group. They lost Ryan Strome, they lost Andrew Kopp, Frank Vetrano, Tyler Mott, etc. Now, this is something that could possibly be a bit of an issue early in the season, as you have some less experienced players like Lafreniere, Kakko, and Hedl kind of stepping into those roles. Now, granted, those guys had flashes of brilliance in the playoffs, but can they do this on a more consistent basis for an 82-game season? That is something that I call into question there. And lastly, Chris Kreider. He's coming off a 52-goal season when his previous career high was just 28. So can they really call upon him to produce at that level while some of the younger talent is still developing? So I think that dynamic will be particularly interesting to keep an eye on this upcoming season. And lastly, we have the Carolina Hurricanes. They finished with a 47-20 record in regulation, 9th best goals for in the NHL, best in terms of goals against, 13th on the power play, and the best penalty kill. No surprise here, the Hurricanes have exceptional defense and strong goaltending. You look at that top 4 on defense, the likes of Jacob Slavin. Now Brent Burns comes over to play with him. You also have Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, and the goaltending has been very strong for them, no matter who's been in net. But in particular, Freddie Anderson had a stellar season, and he finished 4th for the Vezina Trophy. Now here I mentioned that their table setters are in the primes of their career. I think of Sebastian Aho at 25 years old and also Teuvo Teravainen in his late 20s. But actually this team has some firepower that hasn't even reached that level just yet, in the likes of Seth Jarvis, in the likes of Andrei Svechnikov, who had over 30 goals this past season as well. Now, in terms of weaknesses, I first look at that second line center position. So Vincent Trocheck leaves for the New York Rangers. And in place, it could be Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who hasn't quite exactly put it together just yet over the course of an 82-game season. You also have Martin Necas, who could possibly play center, and Jack Drury, although he might be too green for that position, being just a young player in the NHL. They also acquired Max Pacioretty from the Golden Knights, a guy who could put up 30 goals in a season, but the problem is that he's injured, he'll be out long term. So the top six will be hurting for a little while here. And lastly, they had kind of some odd postseason struggles. They didn't win a single game on the road. Their power play was anemic. Their penalty kill started leaking as well. So was this an outlier, or was that a sign of things to come for Rod Brindamore's group? I'm not entirely sure. And two more questions I have for Carolina. First of all, can Seth Jarvis build on last year? I would think so. He had 40 points in 68 games in his first full season. He had 22 points in his final 20 games, so it's going to be interesting to watch his development. And also when it comes to goaltending, now as good as the goaltenders play, they're always injured no matter who's in net. Freddie Anderson was injured for the playoffs, and also Antti Ranta is just perennially injured. So Pyotr Kochetkov, a former second-round draft pick, we'll see if he gets a chance to break in here. He only played 3 games in the regular season, but he was called upon in 4 playoff games this past postseason. Now we get to my overall outlook on the division. These are not my final predictions. I'm saving those for a future video, but let me know yours in the comments below. So I sort of classify this in terms of 3 tiers, right? You've got your non-playoff teams that are evidently going to be out of the playoff race early into the season. Then you have your playoff contenders, teams that are battling for probably a wild card. And then you have your division contenders. So we're going to start at the bottom with 2 teams that I don't see making the playoffs. First of all, the Philadelphia Flyers. I think last year was a sign of things to come. I really just don't like the offseason that they've had the past couple of years, right? With the likes of Ristolainen, with the likes of, Tony DeAngelo, as good as he is offensively, he's not going to help keep the puck out of the net necessarily. Ryan Ellis is going to start the season on the injured list. Joel Farabee, maybe their best young offensive player, is going to be injured as well. And I don't know if Sean Couturier and Kevin Hayes are enough to help this team. Cam Atkinson, even though he had a pretty decent season this past season. So I think this team is in need of a big facelift, and I don't think that Tortorella is going to save them from that. The other team I don't see making the playoffs in this division is the Blue Jackets. So they played actually pretty well for the first half of this past season. But for me with Columbus, they still struggle to keep the puck out of the net. I don't think that their augmentations on defense in the offseason will be enough for that. And also their backup goaltending has just not been good from the likes of Jonas Korpisalo. And you'll see with me, I will normally predict a team that has better defensive goaltending to make it further than a team that can actually produce offensively. Even though Columbus adds Johnny Gaudreau, again, you still have some players who are kind of coming into their own and getting NHL experience. So you might experience some of these growing pains in the upcoming season, but I still think that the future will be bright for the Blue Jackets. Now we get to my playoff hopefuls. So these are 3 teams who I think will battle for a wild card spot in this upcoming season. We'll start with the Devils. I keep waiting for them to take a step forward, and they do have some great young talent. But in the offseason, I like the additions of Andre Palat and Eric Haula. I also like them adding John Marino to their defensive core. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. They have plenty of talent up and down the lineup, especially if Jack Hughes is healthy for the full season as well. My 2 biggest questions for the Devils in terms of being a playoff contender, it's in net with Mackenzie Blackwood. Can he regain his form from a couple years ago? And also Lindy Ruff, is his system working out for this team, or do they need to go to Andrew Brunette, who they just hired as an assistant? Another playoff hopeful I have here is the New York Islanders. Can they find a way to kind of regain their magic from a couple seasons ago? Will Oliver Wahlstrom take a step forward? Will Matthew Barzal have kind of a breakthrough season after kind of a quiet season this past year? And will some of those veterans in the forward group be able to produce a little bit better than they were this past season for a team that struggled in terms of even strength offense? I don't really question the defense and the goaltending. I think it's going to be great this upcoming season. I like the Romanov addition as well. But even so, this team needs to find a way to fill the net a little bit more frequently when it comes to 5-on-5 offense. My last playoff hopeful is the Capitals. I don't think it's a guarantee that they make the playoffs this year. An aging core, Backstrom and Wilson out at least to start this upcoming season. How good is Darcy Kemper going to be in replacement of Samsonov and Vanacek? And there are teams that got better in this offseason significantly who could put some pressure on Washington, not just in this division, but also in the Atlantic Division. So we might even see a situation where 5 playoff teams come out of the Atlantic Division and only 3 come out of the Metropolitan Division. And now for my division contenders. So I do see each of these 3 teams making the playoffs as long as they're fairly healthy here. So first of all, the Penguins, they do really well even when they're not healthy. Crosby is still producing at quite a clip, 84 points in just 69 games. Tristan Jarry is just coming into the prime of his career. Chris Letang is showing few signs of slowing down. And also some of those middle six players, as I kind of talked about earlier, right? If Rickard Rakell can kind of look like he did after he came over from the Ducks, if Jason Zucker can kind of return to form, if assuming that he's healthy, then yeah, this team could start to look kind of deadly, and they wouldn't miss Evan Rodriguez one bit. I absolutely think that the Rangers are a lock with their defense and with their goaltending. I will be interested to see how things go with developing their youth with the likes of Hedel, Kakko, and especially Alexis Lafreniere. How do they sort of mingle in here and produce consistently when it comes to 5-on-5 offense? But the special teams is still very strong. The top line players are still great. Even though Chris Kreider might regress a little bit, I still think this is still a top 3 in the Metropolitan Division. And also Carolina, I think, will be a lock to make the playoffs out of this division. Exceptional defense and goaltending, kind of like the New York Rangers. Yes, they will be missing Vincent Trocheck and also Max Pacioretty, but with a couple of depth additions, you look at Andre Kasha coming over from the Maple Leafs, you look at Paul Stastny coming over from the Jets, in addition to maybe Jack Drury cracking the lineup and the further development of Seth Jarvis. I think they can get enough scoring by committee to score enough and be a division contender this upcoming season. So that's my Metropolitan Division preview for the 2022-23 NHL season. What are your predictions? You guys let me know down in the comments down below, and stick around for more division previews, for my season predictions, for live streams throughout the season, and all sorts of great content. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do show your support with a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here. Hit the notifications bell. That way you know when I'm uploading content. And see the video description down below. You can follow me on social media, purchase some merchandise, or contribute with a donation. I also accept the super thanks here. Thank you, Twisters, so much for tuning in. This has been Nick, and I'll catch you guys later. Ciao.